In 1513, an Ottoman admiral sat down and drew a map of the world. He was meticulous. He was methodical. He documented his sources carefully. And somewhere on that map, he drew a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 307 years. He drew its coastline with an accuracy that modern researchers, using satellite radar data, have found deeply difficult to explain. This is the Piri Reis map. And the longer you look at it, the more questions it creates. Piri Reis was not a forger. He was not a myth-maker. He was one of the most accomplished naval officers and cartographers in the history of the Ottoman Empire, an admiral who commanded fleets across the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean, a man whose sailing charts were considered among the most reliable in the world during his lifetime. In 1513, he compiled a world map using what he described as approximately 20 source charts. Some were contemporary. Some, he wrote, were ancient. One, he specifically noted, had been in the possession of Christopher Columbus. The map was completed, filed in the Ottoman Imperial Archive in Constantinople, and largely forgotten for 4 centuries, until 1929. But here's the part no one talks about. When scholars rediscovered the Piri Reis map in 1929 during a survey of the Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul, they immediately recognized the upper portions, Europe, Africa, the Atlantic coastline of the Americas, as consistent with early 16th century cartographic knowledge. Impressive for its time, but not inexplicable. Then they looked at the lower portion of the map. Below South America, curving along the bottom edge of the parchment, was a landmass. A detailed, extensive landmass with a clearly rendered coastline, bays, inlets, peninsulas, a mountain range interior. There was no landmass there on any other 1513 map, because the continent it appeared to show, Antarctica, would not be reached by any documented human expedition until 1820. 3 centuries later. The initial response from the academic community was cautious dismissal. An error, a misinterpretation, a coastline that merely resembled Antarctica without actually depicting it. And this is where things get fascinating. In the 1950s, a history professor at Georgetown University named Charles Hapgood became interested in the Piri Reis map from a cartographic analysis standpoint. He wasn't a fringe theorist. He was a methodical academic who approached the map with a specific technical question. If this lower landmass is Antarctica, how accurate is the depiction? He commissioned detailed analysis comparing the Piri Reis coastline to the best available geographic data of Antarctica. The comparison produced results that stopped the analysis team cold. The coastline shown on the 1513 map, drawn by an Ottoman admiral who, by every historical record, had never sailed south of the Mediterranean, corresponded with geographic accuracy to the coastline of Antarctica as it exists beneath the ice sheet. Not the surface of Antarctica as it looks today, covered by up to 3 miles of ice. The sub-glacial coastline, the rock and land beneath the ice, the geography that existed before the ice sheet formed, and that modern science only mapped comprehensively using radar technology in the late 20th century. Scientists still can't fully explain this correlation. What happens next changes everything. Because the question this creates isn't simply, how did Piri Reis know Antarctica existed? The deeper question is the one his own handwritten notes point toward. Piri Reis documented his source material on the map itself. In marginal notations written in Ottoman Turkish, he described the charts he used. He wrote that some of his source maps dated from the time of Alexander the Great. He wrote that one set of source charts used a coordinate system and a cartographic projection method that was, even in 1513, ancient. He was not claiming to have discovered Antarctica. He was claiming to have copied it from older maps. Which means the question shifts entirely. The question is no longer about Piri Reis. The question is about whoever drew the sources he copied. And this is where the history becomes genuinely extraordinary. The cartographic projection used in the lower section of the Piri Reis map, the mathematical system by which a curved planetary surface is translated onto a flat piece of parchment, was analyzed by Hapgood and his team with the assistance of cartographers from the United States Air Force Cartographic Division, who provided technical consultation in 1960. Their conclusion, documented in official correspondence, was that the projection method used for the Antarctic section of the map appeared to use a center point located not in Europe or the Middle East, not in any location consistent with 16th century Ottoman cartographic practice, but in a position consistent with mapping from a location in the vicinity of Egypt or the Eastern Mediterranean. Mapping Antarctica from Egypt, using a cartographic method sophisticated enough that it wouldn't be independently redeveloped in Europe until the 17th century. But here's the part that reframes everything. The Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of ancient knowledge the classical world produced, existed in Egypt for centuries before its contents were lost, partially destroyed, and partially dispersed across the ancient world. It is documented that the library held geographical and astronomical texts from civilizations predating Greek scholarship. Texts from Mesopotamia, from Phoenicia, from sources that modern historians cannot fully trace. What it held about cartography, what maps it may have contained that no longer exist in any known archive, is unknown. Unknown because the library is gone. The knowledge it held is gone. Except perhaps for fragments that found their way into medieval archives, into the collections of scholars who copied from copies of originals that no longer exist. Except perhaps for a set of charts that ended up, somehow, in the collection of Christopher Columbus. And from Columbus, into the hands of an Ottoman admiral in 1513, who drew a coastline of a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered for another 307 years. Right now, the Piri Reis map is held in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul. It is real. It has been authenticated by multiple independent institutions. The Ottoman Turkish marginal notes have been translated and verified. The cartographic analysis has been conducted by professional cartographers with no stake in any particular conclusion. The accuracy correlation with the sub-glacial Antarctic coastline is documented. The source claims made by Piri Reis himself are documented. What is not documented, what may never be fully documented, is the chain of knowledge that connects an ice-free Antarctic coastline to a piece of Ottoman parchment in 1513. Somewhere in the gap between those two things, there is a story. A story about who sailed far enough south, long enough ago, to see a coastline that is now buried under 3 miles of ice. A story about who had the mathematical sophistication to translate what they saw into a cartographic projection accurate enough to survive copying across centuries. A story about what happened to that knowledge and how much of it is still sitting, unrecognized, in archives that haven't been fully studied. The map exists. The accuracy exists. The sources Piri Reis documented existed. What we do not have is the beginning of the story. And that is the part that changes everything you think you know about how long human beings have been exploring this world.